Good afternoon, and welcome to the Pollock Theater. I'm Ross Melnick, Interim Director of the Carsey-Wolf Center, UC Santa Barbara Center for Media Studies. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's exciting panel discussion, Media Industries and AI, Emerging Trends and Critical Conversations, featuring media practitioners harnessing the rapid growth and utility of artificial intelligence, alongside pioneering academics and journalists working in real time to make sense of these tectonic transformations. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Carsey-Wolf Center founding benefactor and member of the executive board, Marcy Carsey, who is joining us this afternoon, founding benefactor and executive board member and now UC Santa Barbara trustee, Dick Wolf, who will be delivering this afternoon's opening remarks, as well as alumnus, executive board member and newly elected UC Santa Barbara trustee, Rick Rosen, who will be a featured panelist on our stage. None of this would be possible without them and our illustrious advisory board. I'd also like to thank UC Santa Barbara Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost David Marshall and Michael Douglas Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts, Dinah Ramey Berry, for joining us this afternoon and for their unwavering support of the Carsey-Wolf Center. I'd also like to thank Chancellor Asanis and Eleni for coming by this afternoon, despite their very hectic schedule. This event has taken the work of so many at the Center and the Department of Film Media Studies over the past 2 months. Please join me in a round of applause for the tireless staff of the Carsey-Wolf Center, our graduate student researchers, and our dedicated undergraduate theater staff, all of whom have been working for months on today's launch event and the lobby reception to follow. The Carsey-Wolf Center was founded as a center for film, television, and new media, and renamed the Carsey-Wolf Center to recognize the visionary leadership and support of television pioneers Marcy Carsey and Dick Wolf. The center soon launched 2 major initiatives, the Environmental Media Initiative and the Media Industries Project. MIP, led by Professor Jennifer Holt and Emeritus Professor Michael Curtin, fostered the development of 2 major longitudinal research areas for the center, creative labor and the Connected Viewing Initiative. MIP fostered a series of industry collaborations, field-defining edited collections, articles, and symposia that shaped how scholars think about media industries, creative and precarious labor, streaming media, and digital distribution. Over the past 2 decades, the Carsey-Wolf Center has continued to be an intellectual hub for global scholars to gather for annual conferences, screenings, and panel discussions around media, technology, politics and policy, information, and social and cultural engagement. In 2017, the center and series editors, Professors Patrice Petro and Christina Venegas, launched the pioneering book series, Media Matters, through Rutgers University Press, emphasizing media industries, global media, information media, media and democracy, and environmental media. It has also been a key sponsor of the multinational Media Industries Journal and the institutional home of the Media and Environment Open Access Journal through UC Press. Now the Carsey-Wolf Center is proud to continue its leadership role in media industries research by launching Media Industries and AI, Critical Research on Emerging Trends, a global research initiative on the impact of artificial intelligence on the media industries. With the rollout of artificial intelligence tools in all areas of the media industries, there is a growing need for scholarly analysis of the ways systems of automation, predictive analytics, and recommendation are transforming film, television, gaming, music, and other forms of digital entertainment. AI tools such as Showrunner AI, Deep Editor, Respeecher, and Runway Gen 3 are transforming the production of media content and the roles of creative workers, from actors, cinematographers, and editors to sound designers and makeup artists. There was a long history of technological change in the entertainment industries, but the current conjuncture has brought sudden and dramatic transformations that demand investigation by media industry and technology scholars, for our field, for our students, as well as for a highly interested public. I am grateful to be joined in this exciting new research initiative by Professor and Chair of Film Media Studies, Jennifer Holt, and Distinguished Professor of Film and Media Studies, Lisa Parks. We are very fortunate to also be working with Carsey-Wolf Center graduate student researcher, Kelsey Moore. This summer, we put out a call for proposals to create a global network of researchers, and we were thrilled by the overwhelming response. Our research teams and projects, which will be announced in the coming weeks, hail from universities around the world. We look forward to both fostering and generating cutting-edge research around media industries and AI. In all, we will be funding 15 major research projects on media industries and artificial intelligence, led by 21 scholars from 15 global institutions across 7 countries and 3 continents. There are, in fact, so many different questions related to media industries and AI, including those of our students in the audience today who are already dreaming of becoming directors, writers, producers, editors, as well as film media studies scholars. The headlines out there are certainly complex and also rather contradictory. In August, Forbes reported on the work of 3 Stanford University researchers who found that generative AI was damaging the labor market for early career workers. Earlier this month, however, the Yale University Budget Lab refuted those doomsday reports, noting that AI has had little impact so far on hiring. A few days ago at a Shark Tank summit, Mark Cuban called AI the greater democratizer for young entrepreneurs, who he says can now compete and even leapfrog over older, less tech-savvy competitors, joining a recent Bloomberg report with the headline, "Younger Workers Will Win the AI Economy." In the end, perhaps Ginni Rometty, former CEO of IBM, said it best. AI will not replace humans, but those who use AI will replace those who don't. Facebook founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg has argued that, quote, "We are entering a world where we will learn to coexist with AI, not as its masters, but as its collaborators." While Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, has argued that, quote, "The future of AI is not about replacing humans, it's about augmenting human capabilities," end quote. While those CEOs seem unified about the future of AI, the center is laser focused on going beyond these kinds of C-suite headlines and sound bites and drilling much deeper into the changes all around us and how they impact media and media industries. So we are asking today, what does it mean to augment human capabilities using artificial intelligence for media industry writers, directors, editors, actors, producers, distributors, agents, and marketers, amongst many other roles? How are video game companies, film, television, music, and streaming companies, talent agencies, and social media influencers and platforms navigating the vast changes that have taken place over the past few years? And how much unprecedented and unexpected change is to come? To answer these and many other questions, we've gathered an incredible panel whose enormously impressive bios can be found in your programs. From left to right, we are honored to welcome Rick Rosen, co-founder of Endeavor, now WME Agency. Jennifer Howell, Chief Creative Officer of Deep Voodoo. Ian Kreitzberg, AI correspondent for Puck. Lisa Parks, UCSB Distinguished Professor of Film and Media Studies. And Elliot Wolf, Executive Vice President of Wolf Entertainment and co-founder and Chief Creative Officer of Wolf Games. But first, please help me welcome Carsey-Wolf Center founding benefactor and executive board member and newly elected UC Santa Barbara trustee, Dick Wolf, who will present the afternoon's opening remarks.
Hello, everybody, on a Saturday afternoon. It's gratifying that there are so many of you here. I'm really old. I've been in this business a really long time, and it's the first time I've ever felt this way. I wish I was 40 again, because what you people are going to experience over the next 6 months, 6 years, is going to astound even you. That the future is now, and my message is that AI is not a threat. It's the greatest tool since movable type. And your responsibility is to look at the future and become part of it, not to see this as a threat. And we're dealing with that in the entertainment business right now. And it's a matter of education. When you see what is going to be possible, then everybody will become believers. But I can't emphasize enough that you all have to become conversant with AI, even if you're not in entertainment or media, because it is going to affect every branch of thinking, science, the way we live, what we will be able to do. It's just amazing. And the little I've seen has stunned me. So I really hope that you look at the future as an opportunity and not the end of creativity, not the end of acting. It's not the end of anything. It's the beginning of a new era. And you're phenomenally lucky to be here at this time. So I'm going to turn it over to people who really know what they're talking about in AI on this panel. But thank you for coming out. It's very gratifying.
Thank you so much, Dick. And with all that in mind, I want to turn to the first question for our panel. And for that, I'll reach out to Rick, Elliot, and Jennifer. What areas or aspects of the job are most affected by AI in 2025? I'm equally interested in both the top concerns you have and the biggest opportunities that are out there. And I guess, Rick, I'd like to start with you.
It's a big question. First off, we're in the beginning stages of AI as far as entertainment. And to Dick's point, you know, a year from now, 5 years from now, it's going to look radically different and incredibly exciting. But from a day-to-day perspective, the most usage that I see in our firm from our clients is in the animation area. And in that area, it's very, very active. You know, Jennifer knows a lot about that. She can talk about that. The thing that I'm most concerned about and what our firm is, you know, sort of has our antenna up about, since we represent and protect the rights of artists, is that those artists are protected. And that, as an example, all this talk of, you know, the AI actress Tilly and Sonos 2, you know, from our perspective is a little dangerous, right? Because we believe in protecting the rights of artists. And we believe in the use of AI, but that AI should be driven by artists and not against artists. And so that the intellectual property that's created by our clients and their likenesses, if you're an actor, you know, needs to be protected and compensated for. And not that I don't have a tremendous amount of faith in Silicon Valley, but I believe that we can't necessarily trust those companies to put their own guardrails up, and that it's really the responsibility of agents and studios and, in fact, the guilds to make sure that the artists are protected.
Jennifer, maybe that's a great pivot to you. You have certainly experience in animation, but also in all the areas that Rick is talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm blessed that our company, Deep Voodoo, was started by two artists, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, who very innocently were trying to make a movie and couldn't find a company that could do real deep fake, and so started their own. So my everyday is embedded with AI. Our company is kind of an interesting combination of our AI artists, engineers, and then people like myself, of which there's a couple who come from a more traditional film and television background. And so we're sort of like, you know, developing tools really for filmmakers to make their lives easier, more cost effective, to allow them to be able to do things that perhaps they were never, didn't know how they could pull it off, you know? So yeah, it's been an incredible, for me, I've been part of this company, running this company for the last 4 years and learning every single day and really figuring out how to sort of become part of use AI tools to integrate into traditional pipelines. So it's been awesome.
And Elliot, what are the biggest concerns and opportunities that you see for your company?
I can speak specifically to Wolf Games, but firstly, just on a macro level, I think the opportunity to show instead of tell now is unbelievably powerful. The concept of an image being worth 1,000 words, you are able to build, whether it be a storyboard or a rough sketch of eventually what you want to go shoot. In our case, build a rough prototype to convey the fun of a game. That is unbelievably powerful to rally a team, creatives around to go build something great. So I'm incredibly excited as an individual and talking to folks that are coming into the industry. They no longer have to move through 7 steps to get to storyboarding. They can convey an idea that is much more thought out and can get people excited. For us, personally, on the gaming side, building prototypes and actually being able to play test from someone's idea as opposed to 3 to 4 weeks of work to get the ability to click a button is extremely meaningful. We are moving much more quickly than a traditional gaming company in finding the fun.
So yeah, I guess the next question goes to you, Ian and Lisa. Thinking about this from the journalist perspective and the academic perspectives, and I think I'll start with you, Ian. Can you tell us what are the dominant trends that you're following, related to AI in media industries? What are you seeing out there? What are you trying to convey to readers of Puck these days, and how fast does it move?
This is a very big question. I'll start with one of your last ones there. What am I trying to convey? I think for me, a lot of what I work really hard to convey is nuance. There's, and I think to a degree in my side of media and journalism, the build up to this current moment has been one where we've been losing nuance in SEO and clickbait and drive traffic, right? Social media has kind of, the idea is to polarize, to drive attention. And AI is polarizing, but it's also not black and white. I think there's a lot of complication both in the technical science, which I try to deal with every opportunity I can, and then in all the different ways that this integrates into every industry, be it media and video games and Hollywood, or medical science and these other things. The problems here are often much more complex than it's useful for the companies at the forefront to display. And so when I get into these areas, I always have such a good time because I get to put on hats of different journalists, and I get to specialize in climate one day, or medical biochemistry another day. And these are really hard problems. And so you see solutions that have to be guided by people who have unbelievable expertise in their areas. And that's something that's really interesting to me to watch. Again, whether you're talking about media and storyboarding or writing, or if you're talking about finding cures to diseases. It's this question of what are we actually dealing with technologically, and how does that impact the problem that you're trying to solve? And that nuance is very interesting. In terms of trends and pace, this is moving pretty quickly. I think the more interesting thing to watch is less the speed of, how the models have improved, right? Like we were talking about the difference in 18 months of a video generation model, 2024 to today. They've come a long way. But the speed of deployment and the urgency around integration, I find more interesting than the speed of the actual development of the technology.
And Lisa, how do you deal with AI in your classroom? How do you get students to think critically about AI, especially related to media and culture and all of its impact?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. As much as with journalism, it's studying something that's changing daily, if not minute by minute. So what we do in the Film and Media Studies department is really to approach AI as part of a broader media ecosystem. So we don't think about AI as magic. We think about it as data sets, infrastructure, policies, different media formats and aesthetics, and we also think about creative labor. So we approach it in a really comprehensive way, and we're really fortunate at UCSB in the humanities and arts to have scholars like Jennifer Holt, Rita Raley, Leila Shireen Sacker, Fabian Offert, who are teaching classes related to these issues and introducing students to a very rapidly changing media industry landscape. we got into this because we were concerned about what our students are facing. And we want to be able to teach them the macro level ecosystem as well as have them experiment with the tools. So learn what Runway AI can do, what Sora 2 can do, what DALL-E can do, what the sound respeecher can do. And then once they understand that, they understand the problems with the new regime of labor and also the opportunities. So we also focus on controversies in our classes. Last year when I was teaching media, technology, and society, we looked closely at the controversy around Scarlett Johansson and OpenAI and the use of her voice without her permission and the legal relationships that ensued. And so we want our students to have a multivalent understanding of what's happening with AI in the media industries right now. There's a lot more to talk about, and I feel very fortunate to be able to learn from people who are really facing this in so many different dimensions today, too. So.
I think, Rick, I'm going to come back to you to talk about, you mentioned Tilly Norwood, and I think it's probably the time to bring this up. You know, this is, for those of you who don't know, it's a fully AI, quote-unquote, actor that agents were supposedly, according to the trade journals, very keen to sign. Your agency was not interested, and neither was CA and many others. I'm curious about your thoughts about Tilly Norwood, AI actors, and just what you're doing to protect clients and how you think this portends for the future.
Well, I have to say I'm very proud of our firm and the way we immediately jumped to the forefront. I'm not doing an advertisement for our firm here, but quite frankly, when it came to Sonos 2, you know, where they said that artists had to, they had the ability to use their likeness and their work unless they opted out, and we immediately came out with a statement and said that 100% of our clients, all 6,000, are opting out, and you have no right to use any of them. And we were the first ones to do it. We did it the next day after they made their announcement, and quite frankly, it made Sam Altman stop and pause and change their policy. So now everybody has the ability to opt in. And so I'm proud of the fact that we were at the forefront of that, quite frankly. And it's one of the few times that we got accolades from the Writers Guild and Screen Actors Guild, but we did. And I think that's really important because, as I said in your previous question, you know, we work with artists. It's our world. You know, we believe in protecting the rights of artists and the rights of intellectual property, and that's not to retard the growth of AI. Quite the opposite. We're very excited about it, and it's going to continue to accelerate, but it has to be done in a responsible manner with guardrails and in ways in which, you know, rights of artists are protected.
I think this question opens up for you, Jennifer, and Ian and Elliot, which is the question that you're raising, which is the relationship between Silicon Valley and the tech industry. Sorry, Silicon Valley and Hollywood, I should say. And, you know, what are the relationships? How are they going to be more collaborative, less collaborative? How does this relationship grow, differ, and remain somewhat symbiotic without being contentious? I'm curious just your thoughts as you're seeing these kinds of conversations come up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a way to have both the integrity of and ownership of one's likeness, like Rick is describing, mixed with AI. I think that those two can live very harmoniously. For our company, if we capture a person, if we have a capture rig that sort of photographs them over the course of 30 minutes in different cinematic lighting scenarios, once those images have been captured, that is how we build our model, our AI model that's then used in production. Whoever we've captured owns that material. We don't use that data to train any other models. It's completely locked off. When the production's over, it's either kept or it's destroyed based on what the artist and the production desires. And we are at the very forefront of the technology and I think have amazing technology, and the very best in class working for us. So I think you can have both, is my point, right? I don't think you need to steal people's likeness and sort of do things in a way that is unappealing. And we have artists into our studio weekly doing demonstrations of our technology and really trying to provide comfortability around it, because I think that's the other key. It's like education and comfortability, and realizing that there is a trustworthy path that also can take advantage of the most amazing technology.
Yeah. Ian, what are you seeing out
Yeah,
there?
Ian.
What are you seeing out there?
Well, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but I don't think the Valley has a wonderful relationship with Hollywood at the moment. It feels a little adversarial.
What makes you say that?
You notice I didn't even
I
touch
pick up on
it, right?
subtleties, right? Yeah, I think part of this is because the ethos of the Valley is this mentality of move fast and break things. I'm not the first person you've heard say that, I'm sure. And these major players have you know, they're pushing a very specific narrative, and that narrative is fueled by urgency and speed around adoption, integration, right? Anything that could slow us down is bad. Which is really challenging for media companies and studios because, you know, people need time to understand the implications of what would happen if we do this. Studios need time to understand the implications of, you know, does an audience want this? There are sects of audiences right now that are really anti the integration of AI into the media they consume. And there's backlash, right? So it's not a straightforward answer for a major studio to say, yes, you know what, let's move fast and break things. And so you have this kind of established business and established IP. And protecting that IP is really, really important, right? If you're, you know, whatever, substitute big name IP that everyone knows, you don't want that to be distorted in some way or muddied or watered down by an AI project that you signed off on, right? You want to protect the sanctity of that thing because that's important for your business. And so I think these studios have just a lot of things to consider. And that just doesn't match with the time scale that Sam and the others feel the need to push. And so what you're seeing start to develop is two kind of groups within the tech working on Hollywood chunk of this kind of conversation. And one group is intent on disruption. And that's very much tied to the core ethos of the Valley. And the idea is, you know, you'll hear them say democratization till they're blue in the face. That's the idea. And it's to, you know, they'll talk about taking power from the studios. Then you have a different group. And some companies, like Stability and Adobe, would put themselves in this group, which is, what can we do to enhance? How can we make the process better? How can we make sure more movies get made and just give more tools that can do specific things, be it de-aging or speeding up the pre-production process or previs or whatever it is, right? Thinking about specific tools to just make the process smoother, which makes it cheaper, or shorter, which makes it cheaper. And so you have these two growing camps, and I think Hollywood feels a little bit better about the camp that is trying to provide them tools to help them out, and feels threatened by the camp that seems to be threatening them.
Please, yeah.
I totally agree, you know, and I think also that there's this dynamic over the last several years between Silicon Valley and Hollywood. This tension is kind of a right brain, left brain way of looking at issues. And, you know, and Silicon Valley is very much data driven, you know, and Hollywood traditionally was less so. And, you know, what I think the concern, I don't want to say fear, but the concern that a lot of people in Hollywood has is that, is over the doctrine of fair use, which Silicon Valley utilizes to access, intellectual property. This is something that is being litigated. It's going to be the subject of intense litigation, and who knows in this world, in the Supreme Court, how this ultimately, ends up. But it's this notion of all data is available and usable versus you can use our data. I sound like a broken record, but you can use our data, but do it in a fair way and pay for it. And then there's companies like Netflix, which is becoming kind of almost ubiquitous in terms of the film and television business, which is a Silicon Valley company in Hollywood, right? That sort of combines both. And I remember when I would have my first meetings years ago at Netflix, I would think these people are so different than us, and they speak a completely different language than us. But now it's much less different that way, and we're both sort of coming to each other a little bit better, I think. But, to your point, I think that this is all about the way people look at problems from different perspectives, and ultimately how we deal with the concept of fair use.
And the fair use thing, just to piggyback off that, is really, really interesting to watch. As you mentioned, this is being very much litigated, and so these companies will kind of present a defense of what they've done publicly, as though it's written in stone that their action in scraping essentially the internet is protected by fair use. It's not. That hasn't been clarified yet. That is being fought out in courts. And the interesting thing about fair use is that, if one case is decided in favor of a tech company, that doesn't establish a precedent that erases all the other cases, because each fair use case is hyper-specific to the type of theft that went on, which makes things just super complicated and very interesting to watch. But again, the kind of culture of the Valley that is pushing up against a different culture here in Hollywood, the companies here are happy to pay billions and billions and billions of dollars for chips, for their data centers, for electricity to power them, for the best engineers and talent in the world. But they don't want, or many are not interested in figuring out a way to license the content without which their models don't exist. And part of the mentality coming from that is, we've raised all this money, we need to fight this in court, and we need to win in court, period. Because there's this idea that it would be impossible to license everything because they need so much content. And if they did deals with half the companies, the other half could still sue. And instead of doing this patchwork of deals, their idea is settle this in court, get the affirmative answer that they're looking for, that their scraping and output and whatever is protected by fair use, and then they don't have to worry about this problem. And it's just interesting to think about, how intense these battles are, how many. I think there's like 51 different copyright lawsuits in the US related to AI. It might have gone up since then, since I started the sentence.
Since an hour ago?
Yeah. One weekend of Sora 2 without the guardrails on, they will roll in. And so it's just interesting to watch that space, because it is very much a key moment in terms of their broader vision and work.
One place that I would like to talk about, a kind of symbiosis, is actually between TV and gaming. Elliot, your company had a release this week, in partnership with NBC Universal, and I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about how generative AI is expanding the world of television and using very familiar IP to do so.
Yeah. Just to put a button on that point too, I think you can boil down the two different philosophies to asking for forgiveness versus asking for permission. And you saw that with Sora too. And there's upside to asking for forgiveness at times. If you look at the early days of YouTube, they very much asked for forgiveness with copyright. And then they had such a large market share that the studios actually came to them and said, okay, there's so much reach, how do we now make a deal? Yeah. What is not being discussed on the AI front is the fact that it's individual folks' likeness, and Hollywood is such a relationship-driven business. And the studios have an obligation to their talent, to Rick's point, and that friction isn't going to go away. So I just wanted to put a button on that because I think that there's a lot of danger in asking for forgiveness, but also asking for permission to the point of patchwork can also potentially make certain players left behind. So it's a really interesting debate. In terms of the relationship between television and games, it's ever evolving, and I think that interactive TV to date has largely been a swing and a miss, not to knock those who have tried, but it's somewhere between a lean in and lean back experience because it's really expensive to create the amount of optionality to actually make TV feel like a game. You have to create so many scenes for a singular episode that you're essentially making a full season of television if you think about the Bandersnatch type examples. And what we're really excited about is not necessarily reinventing the wheel on traditional TV, but knowing that TV and film are amazing ways of building fandoms, getting people inside a world. How can we then expand that world? And, you know, at best, you're producing 22 episodes of television in a season. With streamers, it's largely 8 to 10 episodes, and they're on longer cycles. So as opposed to yearly, you're waiting 2 years in between seasons for your favorite TV show. Fans should be able to engage in the worlds of their favorite TV shows much more often than that. So for us, we see the two as means of building what we like to call IP universes. And from what we've seen in Hollywood thus far, streamers and IP holders are really excited about that because it allows them to engage their fandom and get more feedback from their fandom. But using your favorite network show as an example, if there's a new episode on Tuesday or Wednesday, you should be able to play a game in that universe every day in between. And for us, that doesn't mean that it has to touch the storyline that's currently going on in the show. We can actually expand the world, introduce new characters, B stories or C stories that are bite-sized and snackable, and hopefully something that you want to come back to every single day.
I'm just curious, maybe this is a question for Elliot and for you, Jennifer, just maybe as a zoom out, how is AI affecting everything you're doing from pre-production, production, post-production? Just how is AI affecting everything you do and changing the way that if you haven't been studying this, what is the kind of whole world from writing through release? How is AI changing all of that for both of your businesses?
Well, I can go first. I think a reel played before you came on stage, super short sizzle. That was completely AI generated footage, but the shot selection and ideation was still completely creator driven. So we have writers, editors, and AI artists that are working, and their creativity is what you're seeing on screen. Now, from brain to screen, it's a much shorter runway. And for us, that's unbelievably exciting because, being completely frank, we wouldn't have had the resources to get 95% of those shots if it was through traditional production methods. So it's, again, bringing an idea that's in someone's head to life, that idea of showing instead of telling, and being able to put it in front of audiences and see what resonates.
Yeah, I think for students especially, and for sort of emerging filmmakers, AI is a great equalizer. I mean, you can, like Elliot's saying, just having the ability to take your idea and if you don't, not having the funds to hire a art director and a props person and all the things that you might need to at least make some sort of pitch deck, right? Where you can utilize AI to help with that, write your story, create your characters, really build something compelling that then you can take to buyers and then maybe, if you chose to, go a more traditional path to production. So I think that's incredibly exciting. In terms of what we're doing, as an example, we have the ability now for someone, an actor who is sick of sitting in a makeup chair for 3 to 6 hours every morning, starting at 3 in the morning, and all the people that have to be on set to support that person. We can make a model of that actor in prosthetic makeup, and for the entirety of the film, or whatever portion that actor chooses, they don't have to wear any makeup. And we do it all in post-production. And we've just finished 2 movies where that was the case, and are continuing to do more. And again, it's a tool that's available. It doesn't mean you have to use it. Some actors like to feel the makeup on their face. It helps them get into character. But then there's actors who are going into a 3rd or 4th season of a Marvel show, and they refuse to keep going because the makeup is so, there's such a painstaking, you feel like you're suffocating, it ruins your skin. It not only takes 3 or 4 hours to put on, it takes an hour to take it off. For some people, it's really brutal. So that is not only a saving for the actor, but then also for the production. You're saving many hours and perhaps days in a schedule. So that's one example of our use. I think on the animation side, there's tremendous help to be found with AI, especially in pre-production and post. I mean, I think that applies to live action as well, but I mean, there's sort of endless possibilities on the animation side as well.
And I was going to ask all of you, maybe not you, Lisa, because this is a question about our students, because I'm going to ask you what you actually do teach, but I'm curious, Rick on down, what do you think all of us who are professors here, what do you think, and for students in the audience, what do you think we should be telling our students, knowing what's happening on your side of the world, and what do you think our students need to know that maybe is a little less evident to see?
Listen, I believe, and this has been, I've represented writers for 35 years, and I hear Dick saying this since the first day I met him. It's all about the writing, right? So anything that you're creating starts with what's on the page. And whether AI can help facilitate that, I think probably the answer is yes. But at the end of the day, you need a real writer to fine-tune it or to set it up. So from my perspective, it's all about still starting with the story, with the idea, and with the writing. I may sound a little traditional, for this panel with regard to this, but it's kind of where I come from. I think the exciting thing for the students right now and for everybody here is that the barrier to entry is so low today that, you couldn't do that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, let alone when I was getting out of school. You can just go make a film right now on your own, and it's that, and look at YouTube. I mean, that's the perfect example of that. But it's not going to be any good if it's not well written.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I'm such a writer fan and have worked with the best in my career, and I think AI can be a great, you're having writer's block. I think it can be a great way to sort of dump your ideas and help you get started. But to me, it's never going to replace a great writer. AI is not going to replace a great actor. In terms of for students, I mean, I think the fact that you guys are here is such a great, smart thing of it. You guys are all brilliant, because I think you need to have at least a cursory understanding of what's going on and a working knowledge of AI, even if you choose to never use it. I think being able to sort of be conversant in the vocabulary of AI at the very minimum is great. And I think playing with it and learning it, there's so many open source tools out there that that you can learn and play with. I mean, it can be playful, you know, and whether it results in a film or a fully fledged idea, it doesn't matter in the beginning, you know. It's really just becoming familiar with it and being able to talk about it. And again, maybe it's something you never use, maybe it's something that you're turned off to, but I don't know, I find it exciting. As somebody who was not a technology person, who was always in more traditional film and television, I love what I'm learning over these last several years and continue to learn every day. And I think there's amazing places for it, and then there's places that maybe it doesn't make as much sense.
I'm going to largely echo what both of you have said. But, you know, I was talking to someone recently, and the difference between a professional photographer and me taking a picture on my iPhone is not the hardware we're using. It's, you know, they know when to click the button. And I think this speaks to the idea that both of you were talking about, which is gaining the skills to know when to click the button or to know if what you clicked was good. That's not going to go away. It doesn't matter what field you're in. The expertise without AI is fundamentally important. And, you know, this is a moment where it's easy to be kind of scared away from developing that skill on the notion that it will be automated away. And I don't think that's the case. I think the skill is more important than ever in terms of how that actually, you know, turns into whatever career that turns into. Are you writing? Are you observing a model's output? I think that depends where you are. I think good writing will always be sought after by people. But I think the importance of developing the taste and developing the skill and sharpening that pen is just really, really important, no matter if you choose to use these types of systems or if you don't. That's the underlying thing that will just always be helpful.
Elliot?
I got the tough seat at the end of the line. I have to follow all of that.
Follow all of that.
Well, firstly, I'll say I completely agree with Rick's point about writing, and great writing always has a point of view, ideally multiple points of view from different characters to create conversation. And I don't believe that automation is ever going to be able to get there. But as someone who's been lucky enough to move through all the gates and actually create a TV show, and someone who's in the industry, what I hear the most still, by far and away, is no. And I do think that these tools are a great means of not having to move through as many gatekeepers and get an idea, a well-written idea, hopefully, to an audience. And because the cost of production is lower, you also don't need to reach millions of people to create something that would be deemed successful. If you can get 10,000 fans, you have a small business on your hands. And that's really exciting for folks who don't know how to navigate the studio system, who haven't built a career in Hollywood, but have great stories to tell. So I'm super excited about storytelling in the next decade. I think that we are going to get more points of view and more amazing stories than possible in the current ecosystem.
So Lisa, turning to you, what do you hear from students? What do you tell students? What is this? There's anxiety and opportunity. How do you negotiate in that in your teaching, and what do you tell people?
Well, first of all, I want to say, like, we have production faculty. Wendy Jackson is here in the room who you know, experiments. She's a screenwriting professor and a film producer herself. probably adopting a lot of experimental techniques using AI tools in our classes. And I think it's important that within an academic milieu, we are doing this experimental work. Students are learning these tools and being encouraged to figure that out. I want to kind of flip it a little bit and talk also about recommender systems. This is something we talk about in our classes as well, that we need to think about how consumption and audience dispositions to the media industry are changing with regard to the algorithms that are used to monitor our viewing behavior and our consumption of media of all different types. So there's a lot of critical analysis work and attempts to specify and understand these systems that we do in our classes. We have a graduate student right now, Paul Kim, who's teaching a whole class on recommender systems and AI. But you know, Netflix, I think 88% of what people watch, at least 80%, is determined by the Netflix algorithm, your Netflix algorithm. So whereas you may have used to go around a water cooler in the olden days and hear what great shows are on the air, suddenly you're at an interface and kind of being told or hailed into watching particular kinds of content. And I think we need to be recognizing how AI tools are being used on the back end in processes of taste making for viewers and creating something that's way more complex than what we would call a genre. It's almost like an entire video genome. And there's a lot of experimentation that Netflix does in-house about how to try to classify and market all types of content that can be correlated with people's identities, the times that they watch TV, what they've watched in the past, how it anticipates what you would like. I think we need to understand the audience formation around AI, and that's another area of research that we do on campus. I could go on and on. We do a lot of stuff in the classes. As we are engaging in a political moment where we have news media and information circulating and the use of deep fakes, even coming out of our White House these days. How do we educate our students and the publics that the public university serves to think about how to parse information right now? And there are now deep fake detection systems that people need to be aware of. If there's a crucial bit of information that's circulating in the media landscape that's quite concerning, how do you determine whether it's authentic or a deep fake? We also teach our students to go to these hallucination leaderboards. These are systems that you can go to online and look at which chatbots are the most, which large language models are the most accurate in terms of their summarizing of a given bit of content. We need to kind of open up what we're teaching people. I think that the storytelling and creative labor stuff is so essential. And I also think it's going to be linked to a lot of diffusion across different sectors of our economy. And Dick and I were talking about this earlier. It's going to affect how medical imaging is happening, what's happening in warfare and policing. We need to understand the media industries as one system that has enormous influence on other sectors of our economy, as well as our civic life. So those are some of the things we do go into in our classes in this department and in the Division of Humanities and Arts on our campus.
I mean, the reason we're having this conversation is because we feel this is an important thing to be studying. This is where a lot of things are moving. I guess the question I'm asking is, this is moving so quickly in some cases that the debate is moving sometimes not as quickly along with it, but there's a growing debate around AI in different areas. I guess the question, maybe to go back to you, Lisa and Ian, is how is that debate being shaped? And who's shaping that debate? Because people don't necessarily know how the technology and tools work, and yet there's a conversation about it happening really everywhere, including in Hollywood.
You want to go ahead?
I'll take that first. Thank you. Another interesting question. I think in many places, the debate is coming from, or the folks that are shaping it most dominantly are the folks from the Valley, the people who run these companies, executives. I think Elon Musk and Sam Altman have done more to shape this debate than most other people combined in the world. And this is all very interesting to me. When you have the debate being shaped, and again, as I have mentioned earlier, it's an urgent debate, right? You said just now that the pace of technology is outpacing the ability for us to think and talk about it and challenge it even, maybe. It's outpacing a lot of other things too. It's outpacing the ability for researchers to gather robust evidence about it. And so when we have this conversation of AI tutors, should we put this into schools? How do we put this into schools? There's no evidence. We haven't had time to study what does it mean to put this into schools. We're starting to develop kind of qualitative moments of, kids developing relationships with chatbots. Seems like it's going in a bad direction. That's something we should be aware of when we're doing a deal to bring, ChatGPT Plus or whatever it is to a campus. But the way it's being pushed outpaces an opportunity to be thoughtful about this. I think that's all very purposeful. And kind of tied to that as well is you have this broader, as you were just talking about, political movement that's happening. And there's a connection that has formed between these executives and these massive, massive companies that have now staked an enormous, mind-boggling amount of money on this working. So economically, we're approaching a point, if we're not there already, where this has to work. This has to be the Internet 2.0 that was promised, because there's too much money on the line for it not to be. And the tie-in in the urgency department politically is this race, this nebulous race with China and the rest of the world that our government, our Department of Energy, has framed explicitly as another Manhattan Project, which to me is a very, again, purposeful use of words, purposeful phrase. They're not likening it to the moon race. They're likening it to an arms race. Mm-hmm. And that sparks fear, which sparks urgency. And so when you see that playing out, and then you look at the kind of specific differences, right? When we were racing to develop a nuclear weapon, we knew what the finish line looked like. We knew what it meant to beat the other countries to its development. This race doesn't really have one, which makes winning really, really challenging, but makes racing very, very easy. And that push makes me, it develops an environment where you should be kind of questioning everything you hear from everybody, specifically these really heavy shapers of the debate. Why are you saying what you're saying? If you're telling me that the technology can do XYZ, incredible thing. If you're telling me that we need to move fast because to move fast is to lose, why? And I don't think they're challenged enough on the why. I don't think they're questioned enough on the how. And I think it becomes easy to forget, again, that here we're talking the most powerful shapers of this debate are business people that have a lot of money staked on this kind of going the way they want it to go. So this is the environment I'm witnessing.
You're bumming me out, man.
I hear that a lot. There's great stuff too. We can talk about that later.
No, I guess it's okay to talk about the bad stuff.
No, actually, I was gonna move exactly that. So rather than going top down, I was curious about the bottom up, because you mentioned the idea that it's an equalizer, that it does allow you to enter. So I'm curious about the opportunities for independent film companies, independent TV companies, independent video game companies who might have looked at the barrier of entry as being too high, but does AI actually allow for all of these new? You mentioned a company that has 10,000 fans. So I'm curious, definitely from you, Elliot and Jennifer, just what the bottom-up possibilities are from the technology as a way to think about what the opportunities are, as well as after thinking about the concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still got to start with a great idea, you know. That's the most important starting place. But then, yes, I think as a bit of an equalizer, being able to express that idea, like we've talked about, just, you know, having that ability without a ton of resources, I think is an incredible thing for filmmakers and for game makers, whatever the case may be. Just being able to showcase your idea in a way that you couldn't before, but it's got to start with a great idea, great characters, you know, world, all those things.
I completely agree, and to reference the top-down debate, we are not just using American models per se. We are very mindful of what models that we use, but ultimately there is a new model coming out every week. And our job as a startup is to build a modular system where you can plug and play the latest and greatest models for the best outputs. So there is, you know, in this greater arms race for essentially the data and the land share, I do think that the bottom benefits in being able to use these tools. Now, the industry matters, right? Entertainment has very low risk to entry. By someone creating a new fictional world with models, no one's going to get hurt. In the medical field, I don't want an AI doctor until that doctor is very well proven, right? And I wouldn't even say that a doctor will ever be replaced, but AI methods to medicine. So I personally feel like there's a lot of opportunity in the entertainment space because of that low risk. But it, you know, just hammering home the previous points, always starts with the idea, always starts with the writing. It's always going to be creator driven, in my opinion.
And thinking about games, how, just for people who don't know, how do you use AI in creating a game? Just when you get to the basics, someone pitches an idea for a game, what stages is AI going to be used?
Yeah.
I'm curious just if you could just lay out a little bit more of a kind of a basic overview.
So firstly, AI is very good at patterns, and games are built on patterns. So from a logic standpoint, I actually think gaming as a format benefits more than the other creative fields. The actual day-to-day usage, we benefit greatly from what are called no-code coding tools or vibe coding tools. Now, anyone without being a programmer can build a skeleton version of an app. Is that app safe to deploy to an audience as a business? No. We go in and essentially rebuild the code, if not do a heavy cleanup on it. But again, being able to show, not tell, is so powerful. Finding the fun with a prototype, being able to test with that prototype to decide where to invest our resources is extremely powerful. So from a gaming side, it really boils down to being able to put something in someone's hands and figure out whether it's fun or not to invest the resources.
And Jennifer, you were head of comedy development at Paramount. You were head of feature film development at DreamWorks Animation. And I was just curious, thinking about basically the same question, but thinking about animation. How does someone begin to use AI, maybe from a feature-length animated film or from, you know, animated television? How do you begin to deploy AI almost in the same moment of you have a concept, perhaps you've written a script? When does AI get deployed and how? I haven't.
So being at Deep Voodoo, I've met with animation companies that have shown me, you know, sort of what they're up to and how quickly they're able to do things. You know, at DreamWorks, we would develop a movie and like I left a few years ago and the movies I was developing are just now coming out. You know, it takes a very long time. Mm-hmm. It's a 3-4 year process. So I think AI can be helpful in truncating that production time. That being said, the other part of my brain is very much attuned to, and we have it on South Park too, you know, just incredible artists, animators, true artists who you can have a great script, but those storyboard artists start drawing it and they bring in jokes that were never intended, that are just so additive. And so there's, I think the human touch is still so incredibly important, but there are ways to shorten production times. I think especially in the pre-production, perhaps in the animation, although I need to sort of see that proven out, because I'm such a believer in the artist. But and in doing those sorts of things, more movies can get made. Right now it's incredibly challenging, both in the live action and animation side of things. Budgets are being reduced. Things are just harder to sell. They're harder to get made. So the more you can, again, start with a great idea and utilize some of these tools, I think if you can bring your production budget down, you have a greater shot at getting your stuff made, which is exciting.
And you mentioned writing, and Rick, this is a question for you. I guess the real question also about authorship is ownership, fair compensation, intellectual property. How in this world, with all the changes, are you and your agency really protecting those rights? I mean, is it just the same as it's been, or are the contracts changing? I mean, are the kind of guardrails or things you're looking at? How are you protecting clients in this new AI-driven world?
Well, it's essentially the same blocking and tackling, so to speak, on a Saturday, right? But, we need to look at exactly the guardrails, right? Because we have to be protected. Look, this is going to be the subject of intense negotiations for all the Hollywood guilds next year, the Writers Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, and the Directors Guild. Each one of those guilds have their own major issues with regard to the revolution of AI. And in some ways, they're kind of on the same page with the studios. But on the other side, studios want to exploit the work. And so that's where the guardrails are going to be laid out. And we'll be keeping a really close eye on it. It's going to be an intense negotiation, especially with regard to the Screen Actors Guild, as you can imagine, because of the ability to use likeness of actors without, obviously they're going to be able to use them, they're going to be able to age them up, age them down. Imagine taking a movie that was made 40 years ago and putting those actors into that film again, into a sequel, or reversing it, making them younger. These are all really subjects of going to be an intense negotiation. You want to get, you want Matt Damon to go back to the Bourne Identity, okay, maybe, right? But you're going to have to pay him, right, to age him down, and to try it again. These are really going to be very hard negotiations. The Writers Guild, you can imagine, those negotiations are never easy to begin with, but the ability to utilize AI writing on television shows or film, but in particular in television shows, is going to be a very hotly contested, issue. The guilds are going to make sure, and we're on the side of the guilds with regard to this, protecting jobs. We don't want writers losing jobs. We don't want directors losing jobs to AI. I mean, AI is going to be a tremendous tool for the directors, but we don't want the directors or the assistant directors or, all the people that are covered under the Directors Guild basic agreement. We don't, the notion of job loss, obviously not just in Hollywood, but with the advent of AI is an incredibly urgent issue that's going to be addressed.
So people talked a lot about the above the line. I'm just curious if you're, it's not an area of the business that your agency represents, but I'm curious your sense of the below the line, because
It's the same.
there are just so many people in Los Angeles who have been obviously not working much, how much could this really damage the IATSE and all
Well, I don't want to speculate on that. I just think that in all industries, this is what we read about, not just in Hollywood, but with regard to the advent of AI, and Elon Musk and others, say very ominous things about job loss, blue collar job loss, white collar job loss, right? And I think, this is one of the things that we're going to have to ultimately wrestle with. As someone who represents talent, I'm very concerned about that. And I hope it's not, painful.
I think, I'm just thinking about some of the shifting that also happens with the advent of AI. I mean, in my mind, and I think there will be some loss, but I also think there will be shifting in jobs. There are jobs that exist today. AI artist is a job, for example, that didn't exist 5 years ago. I think there is a creation of new jobs as well as there will be loss, but also this shift, which I think is really, really interesting. Anyway, just something to add in.
The last thing to call out on that is the net new opportunities that come from AI as well. There is new forms of content. I know microdramas are all the rage right now, not necessarily specific to AI, but emerging formats that do benefit from AI will come out and provide new jobs as well. So I just want to call out, I think that Rick is absolutely right in all that he's saying, but there is some unknowns here in terms of job opportunity that will emerge as well.
Look, we have to embrace new technology. Whatever you might think of AI, it's not going anywhere. And in fact, it's here to stay, and it's a revolution that's taking place. So it just has to be done ethically, and it has to be done in a way that doesn't take away rights of artists. But I think as far as the university is concerned, and what Lisa and her colleagues are doing, I think it's incredibly important, for UCSB, Carsey-Wolf in particular, to be at the forefront of AI in terms of teaching and training the artists of the future. I know this is something that Dick and Marcy have talked about, and I have talked about with Dick and Marcy, and how we feel about that in terms of the future of the Carsey-Wolf Center. In fact, I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but at a Board of Trustees meeting this morning, the entire Board of Trustees, there was a consensus that the university needs to be at the forefront of teaching AI and grabbing the mantle of being the school that is training people, in an interdisciplinary fashion, not just in media, but all throughout the university. And I mean, I think we all feel that that's, something very, very important that the university does.
That's a great place to pick up on with you, Lisa and Ian, which is that there's been a lot of rhetoric over the last few years that, well, now that we have AI, we won't need to train engineers, but we need to train humanists who can speak to these technologies. I'm curious your two senses of where is the job growth in the future, and what does a humanities-based education provide in this kind of framework? It sounds a little self-serving a question, but I think it's germane to this topic.
I mean,
You're talking to Hollywood people, so self-serving.
I don't know if
Not problematic.
I'll directly address that, but I want to kind of go back to the point that you posed earlier too. Who is setting the narrative about AI right now in the public sphere, in the media landscape? And I personally think that journalists, especially investigative journalists, are playing a really important role, because we have a condition of deregulation in this country when it comes to oversight over the media industry, and especially if you look at the difference between the way OpenAI has operated and Anthropic. OpenAI just kind of went all in and gobbled everything up and tested the limits with Scarlett Johansson, tested the limits in all kinds of ways with IP and training models on people's IP and then seeing what they could get away with. I mean, we've covered this a little bit already. Anthropic, on the other hand, does have a little bit more of a moral compass in the organization, I think. They recently did a legal settlement with writers and are willing, if you're an author who has published work, it's likely that somehow you're in their database and you can register to get a kind of legal compensation from them out of this settlement. I think it's important for us to be monitoring, whether journalists or scholars or just public advocacy groups, what's happening with different companies, how they're operating, and pressuring in cases where we feel it's warranted our elected officials and legislators to act. California has the most AI legislation in the country, but it also tends to be fairly hands-off. So all of this to say, there's a lot to think about the role that journalists are playing as kind of watchdogs right now, drawing our attention to what's happening behind the scenes when all of us as publics can't always get into these industry boardrooms, or people have limits on what they can say because of non-disclosure agreements. So whatever kind of information we can piece together to make sense of this moment, I think it's really important, whether we do that in the classroom or in our conversations in just everyday life.
Yeah, I agree. Journalism is important. Read my work. Your point about the Anthropic lawsuit is really interesting. And yeah, the kind of moral compass of this industry is very much gradients of, legal tolerance. But that one specifically, the way they ended up settling, I think the class was 150,000 books. They trimmed it down to that number.
Yeah.
That Anthropic had illegally stored on a disk drive. And the settlement would have Anthropic pay out $3,000 per book. And so it's the largest settlement in recorded settlement history. The interesting thing is that if this had gone to a jury, Anthropic could have been forced to pay as much as $150,000 per work. So you're talking about, and I'm quoting people here, company-ending litigation. And so in that instance, they had a huge vested interest in, once they reached a point to settle, make the class as big as possible, get everyone in there so we can, put a period on this and stop having these conversations, because that company could not have survived a settlement of that size if this had gone to court. And that in and of itself was a huge precedent to establish.
Absolutely.
In support of a licensing regime, because Anthropic was happy to pay the couple $2 billion here. They did not want to go to court. I don't think it would have gone well for them if they did. So that, as that plays out, that's very interesting to watch. And there are certain companies that are, for whatever reason, are a little more disposed to playing ball than others. So that's just an interesting thing to call out there. In terms of the jobs, you asked about the jobs.
Thank you for answering that question.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think it's really interesting what we're seeing right now. We've talked a lot about narrative. We've talked a lot about shaping the debate. We don't know where we're at in terms of the actual technological development at the moment, where we stand today. AI is a charged and interesting term because it's not clear what it refers to, and it's a very old field. And so the scientists that have been working on this for 30, 40, 50 years get really annoyed that people talk about AI as AI today, because it's not specific. Are you talking about large language models? Are you talking about a different type of machine learning algorithm? You're talking about expert systems, right? Like there's a whole iteration of different algorithms and with different techniques that sit under this umbrella that is AI, and this attempt to realize an actual artificial intelligence. And it's not clear that we'll get to that point. And that term itself has become so overused and made so meaningless that then you hear these other terms like artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence. The foundation, which I just find so fascinating, of artificial intelligence, it was a marketing term in the 1950s. They were trying to get money to do a study at Dartmouth, and it caught on. It sounds good. And so this is what you have. And what you have is systems that are powerful but limited in very specific ways. The people shaping the debate will talk about the idea that it is a given that we will achieve these more powerful systems, that the systems today will just become more powerful. There's a lot of specific techniques they're trying to work on to get them there. It's not clear that they'll get there. You know, if progress in AI stopped today, that would still take us decades to work on diffusion and figuring out where this slots in, which makes the jobs story a really complicated story. Does this erase all jobs? A lot of people don't think it will, but it's hard to see how that plays out. Like, what will the jobs of the future look like? I don't think anyone really knows at this point, and it is to a degree dependent on the course of progression the technology itself takes. But then also, if OpenAI had genuinely achieved artificial superintelligence tomorrow, it takes a very long time for these things to diffuse. And we're seeing that play out as businesses work really hard to integrate large language models into their workflows. It's a really hard challenge. You're talking about entire structural shifts at an organizational level, and these things at many organizations happen very slowly. The data is not organized properly. Their systems aren't designed to handle this kind of integration. It creates more work for them because workers used AI. It got very specific bits of sand in certain, cogs, and then other people had to come in and identify and clean those things out. And that might be a job of the future that we're starting to see shape up. A coder who's so good at code that, they'll read back code before it gets shipped, so you don't break the entire system. But it's all, it's a very. I don't think anything that we're seeing here exists in a vacuum. I think there's the technology itself, there's the diffusion of the technology, and then there's what world do you kind of believe that we're shaping. I believe that this is a choice that society will get to make. I don't think we're making a kind of magical genie that will just transform stuff, right? Transformation will happen in little bits as people bring things in that actually add value.
Well, I've asked you all a bunch of questions, and I think the way I'd love to end this is to go to each one of you. And Elliot, this time I'm going to start in your direction, if you keep getting it towards the end. I'm curious just your thought about what you want people to leave with and what maybe we haven't discussed, something that kind of animates what you do at Wolf Games and things that you're thinking about with AI in the future that you want us to kind of think about after we leave here.
I'll start with the former. I think if there's one thing that everyone should leave with, it's feeling empowered to be able to bring your story to life, your stories to life, I'm speaking specifically to the entertainment industry, in a manner that wasn't possible just 12 months ago, arguably even 6 months ago. And the tools can be intimidating on first approach, but once you get them in a place where you can communicate and actually pull what is in your brain into conversation with these tools, I find them as a creative unbelievably exciting. And some of the best ideas have come from the kitchen sink, creating every single day until you get a good idea. These tools, this next generation of tool sets coming out, empower you to do that in a way that is much more beautiful and engaging than past. And just to reiterate again, the best idea will win. That's never going to change. But the way that you communicate that idea to friends, family, even just to get the confidence to share it with others is really compelling and exciting. In terms of Wolf Games, we are trying to chase the in-between space. I have a lot of conviction that there is a massive opportunity at the intersection of television and gaming. How that opportunity shapes into something that is in your hands, we are still discovering day after day. And I think that small wins beget bigger wins in terms of building a future where those two things are actually one. They won't be one before they're somewhere in between the two. But we are trying to create net new opportunities in the entertainment space. And I would argue that this opportunity that we're chasing is one of hundreds that will emerge. You've traditionally thought about telling stories in very rigid formats because you need the distribution of major players that require you to tell those stories in those formats. As these tools emerge and distribution is democratized across the internet, you can tell a story how you want to tell a story. So please be creative. I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time, specifically as a student, to be a creative.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Lisa.
It's inspiring to hear you say that, and I guess one of the issues I also want to bring up to piggyback off this is that I hope that the current moment will create more open opportunities. Sometimes in our classes about AI, we teach this concept of automated inequalities and the idea that a new technology can emerge and kind of either intensify or reinforce existing social or economic inequalities that involve gender, race and ethnicity, class. And I do hope this is a moment where more people will be encouraged to enter the media industries and tell their stories and have access to tools that will allow them to do so. And I think as we're teaching the tools, we need to be really attentive to these, to social differences and make sure that kids are gonna have the chances that they should have to tell their stories and see them shared at a mass scale. Or even in a more micro scale, but with a really passionate audience and following. So that's one point I want to make. I also want to say that I think the infrastructural aspects are really important. It's been brought up a little bit, but we have a colleague, Jason Ludwig, who is a historian of computing, and he's just published a bunch of public-facing pieces about the Trump administration's AI action plan, which came out in July. And it has 90 different policy dimensions in it, but one of them is huge federal allocations to building up massive AI data centers. And that is going to change neighborhoods across the country. These data centers are really important to as they undergird an AI-driven media industry in the US and beyond, but they also require like massive land grabs and water resources, and they also have environmental impacts. And the people who are adjacent in these communities should also be involved in conversation about what the impacts might be. So that's something that didn't really come up in the conversation, and I'm really interested in infrastructure as a scholar, so I thought I'd add it to the table just as a kind of as an issue of possible public concern.
Thanks, Lisa. Ian.
Yeah, that was a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, I am generally an optimistic person in people. And I think if you're walking away from this with one thing, I would just keep in mind, I think a lot of people hear AI or they hear people throw around a couple of jargony phrases like reinforcement learning or something, and they just kind of step out because it sounds complicated. And, why should I have an opinion about something that deals with a technical science that's kind of beyond me or hard for me to understand? And I would hope that, people don't take that impression of what's going on here. You don't need to understand the inner workings of a large language model to have a very valid opinion about how it's deployed, how it's integrated into your life and livelihood in society. I think the point about infrastructure is an excellent example of that. You don't need to be a computer scientist to say, hey, maybe we should think a little bit harder about if we want a 2 or 3 gigawatt scale data center in a city in our area that is already suffering from air pollution, that already is populated by underserved people. And so I would just think hard about this stuff. I think the fact that you're here is evidence that you're doing that. But take back that space, that even though it is a technical science, right, it doesn't really matter. Think really hard and be very thoughtful. If you're using it, if you're not using it. If you're using it, I think intentionality is really, really important to make sure that, I think this is one thing we haven't talked about, and this is a risk that a lot of people are concerned about, the idea of kind of cognitive displacement. What are we sacrificing in thinking about? And so if you're using it, be very thoughtful. And just in general, be very thoughtful about how you want this world that AI is integrating into to be shaped. And then, make your voice heard and make your cool micro series, or become a theater actor and just embrace a different kind of art and storytelling. I think storytelling is ancient and human, and that is not going away. And so I find this moment to be an opportunity more than anything else for really good storytelling to just push through.
I'm such an optimist, and I'm very optimistic around AI, because I've seen the countless people that have come into our studio who, some of whom have come in really, skeptical and scared. And I think the term AI has such a sort of villainous backstory at times, but I've seen people's eyes light up and brains kind of break when we show them the tools that we've developed that can aid directors and actors and things that feel like really life-changing production-wise. So I'm super optimistic around it. I'm also so incredibly impressed by the teachers, the professors, the teachers, this center, what you guys are talking about, how incredibly well informed you are, and smart and driven and passionate. And so I feel just incredibly hopeful for all the students here and the group of people that came here today. Just the curiosity and also the support that the students obviously have here is incredibly impressive.
Rick, you have our final statement.
Well,
Don't fuck it up.
my wife is channeling me. Look, I think the message I'd like to leave is to embrace change, embrace what's happening, embrace the revolution that's upon us. I think, Ian was saying, from the beginning of time, storytelling has evolved from writing on caves to where we are today. And as I said in the beginning, the power of storytelling is immense, and it's all about the story and the written word. And if I were a student today, I'd be writing. I've always said, and I've said in the classes that I've talked to here, a writer's never out of work. You may not get paid at the moment, but you're always writing, right? And so you have to write and continue to write and read and learn to read critically and to utilize those tools, as in the advent of AI. I mean, AI is going to be a tremendous tool to the next generation of creators and filmmakers, and the barriers to distribution are breaking down. It's going to be easier to get your work exhibited than it was, and it has been. And so, I know when I'm talking to young people, you're not afraid and you will embrace the change. So maybe I'm talking to some older people here to embrace it, enjoy it, and it's going to be a great ride.
I just want to say on behalf of Jennifer Holt, and Lisa will share with me, I really, truly appreciate everything for you guys for being here, and thank you all for joining us. I just want to remind you, we're going to have a reception in the Michael Douglas lobby, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.